Overcoming by Pure Foy's Girl. Chapter 12. The ride to Fernhill was longer by coach than by horseback, Will realized, watching the terrain roll past as the Duke spoke to Hannibal of Anthony's prospective fiancée. As Will had already been told of Anthony's intended in confidence, he excluded himself from the conversation, and neither man took notice of it, though Hannibal was unusually somber and preoccupied in his responses. It made Will wonder if something had gotten into his husband, that he was so strangely not his routine, overbearing self. He'd certainly behaved oddly after crashing in on Will's bath this afternoon, demanding he finish, as if personally offended by the idea of Will conceding his place. Very strange indeed, considering his usual behavior. Determined not to think of unpleasant things for the day, Will nervously straightened his jacket, quietly appreciating its fine cloth and color despite himself. Quality was a pleasure he partook of so little that he was helpless against it, and was surprised that Hannibal had not baited him on the subject by now, no doubt having seen him surreptitiously fingering the hem of his waistcoat where it peeked from beneath the front of his unbuttoned jacket. The grand namesake of Fernhill came into view round the bend, a massive, sprawling structure Will had only ever glimpsed from the uppermost turrets of Hertford House. It had seemed so distant there on the horizon, a tiny speck of stone set against the blue sky. Now, travelling past its foundations, it seemed a monster on par with Hertford House itself, aged and noble and secure in its sheltering of generations of demons. "What on earth are you gaping at?" Hannibal asked, sounding more like himself. "I can't imagine Anthony hasn't had you over when the family is out, yet you act as if you've never been here before." "I haven't," Will said, shrugging, tipping his head to see more of it. Hannibal leaned over him, an easy thing to manage as Will was slender, and rather a bit shorter than he, and looked with him. "Damn that cousin of mine, anyway, never inviting you over," he muttered, trying to see Fernhill through Will's eyes, and finding it very grand indeed. He was distracted somewhat by the press of Will's slender back against his chest, and the tickling fluff of his sweetly scented curls. He recalled how he'd looked fleeing his bath this afternoon, pink and pale and lovely and all, and felt his pulse pick up. Entirely uncalled for. Very nearly. Clearing his throat and pushing the thought away, Hannibal asked, "It's impressive, isn't it?" "Though not so impressive as Hertford House," Will said, his cheeks pinking at the pressure of Hannibal's body against his back and shoulders, the man's warm breath stirring his curls. "Is it just as lovely within?"
"Even more so,"
the Duke said, the pleased expression on his lined face causing both of them to nervously retreat in opposite directions.
"I'll have Anthony give you a tour."
"Please do," Will said, delighted at the prospect.
"How your face lights up at the mention of that bounder,"
Hannibal observed, smirking when Will's cheeks reddened even further.
"I'm surprised he didn't marry you for himself."
"According to you, he did. Such unfortunate luck for us both that the law says he didn't, as he finds me pleasing enough," Will said, feeling as if a complaint lay lodged in Hannibal's words, as there so often was. "I think I should have been happy as Anthony's spouse." The wistful lilt to his voice made Hannibal feel uncomfortably guilty and irritated. Guilty for how he had behaved that Will would wish for such a thing, and irritated that he had maneuvered himself so quickly out of Will's regard so many years ago. He had no one to blame but himself, he knew, but that did little to aid him. Regret would not, he knew, pull a teacup together, no matter how one might wish otherwise. Once he deemed his actions justifiable. Now, comparing the poised young man at his side to the youth he'd walked away from, he found himself questioning his own decisions, and what he found did not settle him nor give him peace of mind.
"Will, there's no cause for this type of thing,"
the Duke scowled, glowering at both of them.
"You are married to Hannibal, and that is that."
"Yes, that is that," Hannibal echoed, watching Will drop his head a little in contrition.
"We will have to make the best of things as they are."
The coach pulled to a halt, and the footman rushed to get the doors, gesturing them out into the expanse of the back garden, where the sun cast a merry glow on all sorts of revellers. Will stared, sudden anxiety pinching his features as he looked out over the vast acres of green lawn and carefully tended flower beds, lanes of trees and copses that led onto thicker wood, all framing an enormous lake. He was used to the sprawling expanse of the Duke's estate, but this was the first time he'd seen so much land covered by so many people.
"Hannibal, I wasn't entirely sure you'd come,"
Bedelia said, drifting over their way as the footman got the Duke settled into his chair. She looked fresh and comfortable in the cool air, the colours of her day gown light and complementing her pale colouring. She held out her hand to Will and stroked his cheek, smiling slightly at the way his eyes dilated.
"Is there something on his face?"
Hannibal asked, bristling.
"You spend an inordinate amount of time fondling him."
Will sighed, already tired, and stepped away from the slight comfort of Bedelia's touch.
"Just because you have no idea how a civilized alpha communicates with an omega, Hannibal, does not mean that I am at fault,"
she said, the slow cadence of her voice never rising above a soft purr.
"I am happy to instruct you should you ever decide to forsake your barbaric ways." "You, Bedelia, light of my life," the Duke said, wheeling rudely past Hannibal to greet his granddaughter. "Let's be pleasant, shall we? Show me to those children. I insist on holding all the new little ones."
Bedelia gave Hannibal a lingering, amusing look, and settled her hand on the Duke's shoulder, saying, "Of course, grandfather. Oh, and Will. Anthony has been waiting impatiently for you to arrive. Do go put him at ease with your presence, will you?" Will drew a deep breath as she moved off with the Duke, fussing with the tail of his coat, and suddenly very nervous of his appearance.
"Will?"
Hannibal said, busy tugging at his own cuffs, preening when Will glanced at him.
"You're very pale. Something the matter?"
Will didn't respond for a moment. He just looked out at the groups of neighbors and society members with trepidation before finally saying, "I have never seen so many people in one place before." Hannibal frowned and followed his line of sight, ignoring the other newcomers who milled around them to find their respective ways into the garden.
"I thought it rather smallish party, actually, compared to most. Parties I've thrown at Gelly Field make this one seem quaint."
"I'm sure," Will said, casting around another look. "Yet to me this seems a veritable ocean of humanity, Hannibal. I am not used to it."
"No, I do not imagine you are,"
Hannibal said, mouth pursing softly with concern.
"'Tis very good luck we have time before season starts to acclimatize you to such gatherings."
"I am sure you'll be far too busy attending parties in the capital and filling your parliament seat to throw very many parties all the way out here."
"Quite right, but considering you will be with me at those very same parties,"
Hannibal said, amused by the light scowl that crossed his little mate's face,
"we should strive to numb you to them while we have the chance to do so. Ah, there is Anthony."
Will looked around where grandfather had drawn a large gathering of family to him, all very delighted to see him out at long last.
"Will,"
Hannibal said, catching him by his elbow and guiding him towards where Anthony was greeting his grandfather,
"please don't forget the purpose of attending today."
"How could I?" Will asked, gracing him with a dour glare. "You wish to show the world how you have returned as a hero, graciously excusing me my existence, and nobly looking past my deficiencies to do as your grandfather bids you. What a long-suffering martyr you are, Saint Hannibal."
"Well, thank the gods that you're in good form today,"
Hannibal said, chuckling at his venom.
"I should hate to suffer through this provincial horror without your surly peevishness. No one would ever believe me a saint otherwise."
"Don't worry yourself on that count, Lord Clarges," Will said, wishing that the mere presence of this man didn't give him such conflicting signals of safety and danger. "Your reputation precedes you, however. Sainthood will be difficult to obtain."
"You've remarked on my reputation more than once, Will, but I've no idea how on earth you've heard very much,"
Hannibal said, amused by the way Will glowered up at him.
"Stuck out here in the country for 6 years like a monk in a monastery. I doubt anyone would carry much gossip that far."
"They can and do," Will said, relieved to hit the shade of towering old trees that kept the worst of the sun off. "The servants chatter among themselves, and I hear it in part."
"Why on earth are you mingling with the servants?"
Hannibal asked, bewildered.
"Honestly, first passing yourself off to the county as an estate manager, and now hobnobbing with servants. Your upbringing has been particularly peculiar."
"Yes, you could say so," Will said, relaxing enough to start looking at those around him, admiring the many lovely colors of dresses and fashionable jackets that abounded.
Did your father not instruct you?" Hannibal asked, curious. "I imagine he must miss you very much. Has he been banned from the premises as well?" "My father is a busy man and has no reason to see me," Will said, his throat constricting painfully with his words. "His instruction was vigorous and weighty, and I bear the fruit of it all these years later. His wisdom in raising me has served me well, I can never say otherwise." "And your sisters, have none of them contacted you?" "Not so much as a card," Will admitted, blushing a little when a woman caught his eye and winked at him for staring overly long at the pattern on her dress. "They are grown women with households to run and families to rear, all happily paired with men who suit them. Would be rude to press on their happiness." Hannibal wrinkled his nose at that. "A very strange family it seems. My family certainly has no qualms pressing upon my happiness. I am sure I have met one or another of your sisters over the years. I should have asked after you." "Lord Clarges, they would never!" Will said, laughing in his indignant huff. "Speak to a man of standing of his detested spouse, their own brother, while in public? He may have bewailed his rearing of me, Lord Clarges, but my father raised his daughters to be better than that. Heavens, they'd have died of apoplexy if you even breathed my name to them. I'm very glad you never recognized them. I shouldn't want that on my conscience, thank you." "I would assume that once word gets round about our reconciliation they will be clamouring at the doors," Hannibal said, smirking. "Only at your invitation," Will said, and looked down at his feet as they walked, his eyes tracing the pattern of pebbles beneath his boots and the fine silt of dust gathering on the polished leather. "And I would not call this reconciliation, Hannibal. I am not entirely certain how to interpret your intentions, considering what I know of your opinions." "Do they require interpreting?" "I have told you, Will. I desire that child from you for my grandfather's sake, and you must surely have given thought to a little one now and then," Hannibal said, distracted by the idea of Will with a baby. "As we are both adults with functioning senses, we should be able to manage that without undue fuss and nonsense." They drew near enough that Anthony caught sight of them, and he strode their way with a happy grin, proudly escorting a very lovely woman on his arm. "Lord du Maurier," Will said, vastly relieved to see him with his intended. Anthony had told him of her, a feisty and humorous Omega who suited him entirely. He shot a sharp look at Hannibal, willing him not to be rude, and gave her an honest smile that she returned with open friendliness. "Hannibal, you made it," Anthony said, unable to resist needling him just a little. "Has anyone been caught yet?" "Give it time," Will said, ignoring Hannibal's sour look. "Anthony, you're being rude to your friend," Hannibal said, and took her hand to grace it with a soft kiss, saying, "Young lady, you are a vision of loveliness. Allow me to advise you not to continue on with this dandy, as you are far too fetching to settle for the likes of him." Will blushed, uncomfortable with his effusiveness, but not surprised. Even Hannibal could get over his dislike of Omegas for the sake of spiting Anthony. "Lord Clarges, you're too kind," she said, her perfectly modulated and sweet tone speaking of someone with musical inclination. "Anthony warned me you might be dangerous. He clearly fears your charm." "As well he should, as he has none for himself," Hannibal said, finding the scent of her skin quite strangely absent. Most beta women used some type of perfume, and usually the ones courting alphas use scents designed to attract attention, not subvert it. "Don't encourage him, Frederica. He has far too good an opinion of himself as it stands," Anthony said, and extracted her hand from Hannibal's grip to hold it in his own, saying to Will, "May I introduce Miss Frederica Lounds?" "Will Graham," he said, unused to anything else, and he kissed her hand lightly as he knew he should. "Anthony has told me so much about you." "You're the very image of your sister," she said, delighted with him and no doubt knowing that he was an Omega, same as she. He assumed Anthony would have told her, but barring that, his own use of the same scent blocker she herself used would immediately name him one. "'Tis truly uncanny." "So I'm told," Will said, dropping her hand as well as his gaze. "Don't you not find them strikingly similar, Lord Clarges?" "I've never set eyes on Will's sister, nor any one of his kin," Hannibal said, wondering at Will's strange behaviour with her. "And as you know, this one right here married him for me, so I've never had the pleasure of meeting Will's family." "No, Lord Clarges?" she asked, amusement shining in her light blue eyes. "I was not given to understand you'd been terribly busy this past 6 years." "Yes, well, it was lovely meeting you," Hannibal said, summoning a smile. "Would you care to join Grandfather, Will? Not so fast, Anthony said, grasping Will by his elbow and guiding Frederica into place. You're my cousin, and no one has let slip yet, but I wanted to tell Will first. It's been decided. Freddie and I are to be married.
Oh, Anthony, that's wonderful, Will said, delighted for them both. Congratulations to both of you. I'm sure you'll be perfectly happy together. Oh, the family must be very excited.
Yes, they are, Anthony said, grinning from ear to ear. Or rather, they will be, once Hannibal's opinion is settled on the matter. Why should my opinion carry a feather's worth of weight? Hannibal asked, unspeakably relieved by Will's obvious delight for their union. I am sure your parents would not allow you to choose a young woman who was unsuitable for you. Not that, exactly, Anthony said, exchanging a long glance with Frederica, who tipped her head in silent agreement and promptly laced her hand through Hannibal's elbow, saying, "Walk me around the lake, Lord Clarges, so we can get to know one another a bit better." "I would be delighted," Hannibal said, eager to be seen as accommodating by those present, and, perhaps, show his more chivalrous side to his reserved spouse. Will watched them stroll off together and looked at Anthony, who seemed fairly satisfied and amused. "He hasn't realized," Will said, swallowing nervously, anxious on her behalf. "Anthony, don't worry so much," he urged, draping his arm over Will's shoulder to draw him into a stroll some ways behind them. "Freddie can handle my cousin, Will. It's all the more amusing that he can't figure out she's a Megan. That keen nose of his is so blind in such oddly specific ways. Truly is uncanny."
"I'm not sure if his nose is blind or if her products are stronger than mine," Will said, lamenting the efficacy of his own regimen. "He still manages to catch my scent."
"Well," Anthony said, and gave Will a soft, lopsided smile, when he added, "You have bonded, Will, haven't you? Even if he doesn't know it."
Will sighed heavily, frowning at the idea of it. "It only goes one way, Anthony. I doubt that could be it. Perhaps just his keen nose after all."
"Well, he does seem to be more interested," Anthony said, smiling and nodding at those they passed on their way. "Or at least more attentive. I guess he was serious after all about reclaiming his place."
"Yes," Will said, his thoughts returning to his saddle and what Matthew had said. Taking advantage of the moment, he asked, "Anthony, what would Hannibal do to keep his place as heir?"
Anthony's brows rose and a curiosity filled his eyes. "I would have had a different answer for you a week ago, Will. Now, I can honestly say I'm not sure."
"Except an Omega, perhaps? Would he go so far as to do violence?"
"Violence?" Anthony echoed, immediately more attentive. "Will, why would you ask me that?"
Will swallowed hard, reminded in an instant that for all their differences, Anthony and Hannibal were cousins. When it came down to it, blood would always pool together, and it was dangerous to ask Hannibal's family such questions. Unnerved, Will wet his lips and told him, "Please forgive me, Anthony. I spoke without thinking."
"He was a soldier, Will,"
Anthony said, his uncertainty about Will's purpose making his words cautious and careful.
"He left the war behind, but he will always be a soldier. Violence is a part of him now, but if there is something specific you've heard, gossip perhaps—"
"No, Anthony," Will said, controlling his nerves with difficulty, knowing that Anthony knew something was amiss. "Please, things have been very stressful for me recently. I've no idea why I asked such a thing. Think nothing of it." Anthony stared at him for a long, assessing moment, but gamely nodded in honor of Will's wishes. Will remained silent at his side, grateful that he hadn't betrayed his fears to the man who had always been his friend. A man who would feel compelled to defend Hannibal, or perhaps warn him of Will's suspicions.
"Whatever you may hear of Hannibal today, Will,"
Anthony said, his fond gaze on his intended where she strolled arm in arm with Hannibal,
"please take it with a grain of salt. There is nothing people love more than to tear down something they think is above them."
Will smiled at that, tight and unhappy smile that it was, and at least tried his very hardest to put the saddle and its implications to the back of his mind. "Anthony often speaks about you," Frederica said, floating at Hannibal's side with the grace and weightlessness of dandelion fluff on the wind. She was rather smaller than Will, and had an abundance of riotous red curls that refused to be tamed into submission. "Always in terms of Will Graham, though."
"Ah, yes, Will," Hannibal said, annoyed to be reminded of his cousin's close relationship with his spouse. "We, however, have not had the pleasure of hearing about you in turn."
"Not surprising," she said, laughing softly. He was nervous for your approval. He does set an enormous store in your good opinion. Not to mention he has, until very recently, always imagined he would eventually marry Will."
Hannibal stiffened a little, irritated to hear it put in so many words. "And that doesn't bother you? The fact that he wanted to marry my mate?"
"No,"
she said, a merry twinkle in her blue eyes at his choice in words.
"Will's perfectly lovely, all the more so for not believing himself to be anything such. There's a melancholy in him that seems to lure alphas, especially ones as good as heart as Anthony. In truth, Lord Clarges, knowing that Anthony would choose me when Will Graham might still be his, only tells me how much Anthony truly loves me."
"In that you are mistaken, Miss Lowndes," Hannibal said, frowning at her summation. "There was never a possibility Anthony would marry Will. I would never stand for it."
"You certainly gave everyone a vastly different impression,"
she said, her blue eyes full of mischief when she looked up at him to gauge his response. "I cannot control what assumptions people make from my prior actions, but I assure you, I am back to take my place and ensure Will takes his own," Hannibal said, smiling to think of Will getting his proper due. "Relationships are not always what they seem. You will understand once you are wed."
"On that subject, I must be sure you approve," she said, suddenly quite serious. "Anthony is adamant, as am I."
"I have no grounds to disapprove," Hannibal told her, wondering at their persistence. "You are moneyed, I assume, young enough to bear him heirs, deep enough in his esteem that he is caught in public with you, intelligent enough to recognize his faults, and wise enough to understand they are few."
"Am I?" she asked, smiling a little. "Intelligent, that is?"
"You are not holding his relationship with Will against him, knowing it is nothing like he may have once wished. You do not feel threatened by my spouse, but you do admire him."
"Even though he's O'Megan?"
she innocently inquired, and Hannibal had the good grace to flush a little, winning a mischievous smile out of her.
"Lord Clarges, you might want to tug your waistcoat down a bit. Your prejudice is showing."
"My opinions are based on facts, young lady. Facts speak for themselves."
"Do they? And what do your facts tell you of Omegas?" she asked, squeezing his arm to her modest bosom. "I am curious now."
"In my experience, Omegas are flighty, flirty little butterflies," Hannibal said, reciting his hard-learned lessons like dogma, and doing his best to keep his opinions safe for feminine ears. "They like nothing more than to idle about, spending money that is not theirs on things that catch their fleeting attention. They are children, most of them, easily distracted by something sparkling and pretty, but prone to throwing fits and acting out if not indulged. I find them tiresome, annoying, mindless baggage." He trailed off, his memories of his father's concubine giving way to thoughts of Misha and Will. A jarring juxtaposition indeed. Freddie absorbed his lecture in silence, her red brows drawn together in a slight frown.
"Will is not at all as you described."
"No, he defies explanation," Hannibal said, focusing on the image of his poker-faced Omega. "He is argumentative, hot-tempered, violent, and altogether uncommon."
"Goodness! Tony must not know him half so well as you do. Which is passing strange, as he has spent a good deal more time with your spouse than you have."
"Why must I find myself surrounded by provoking creatures?" Hannibal asked, angling an exasperated, amused glance down at her. "Do you fish, madam?"
"Fish?"
"Never mind," he said, looking away to view the lovely scenery. "I will spare you the explanation. Be warned, however, never to agitate Will, or you'll go worse for it."
"I have no intentions of agitating him in the least, and can't imagine why anyone ever would. He's such a friendly and thoughtful young man. 'Tis my hope we can be fast friends. Ah, whist! Shall we play Lord Clarges?"
Hannibal looked around to find that several tables had been set up beneath a billowing canopy, attracting those seeking shelter from the sun into gaming. A table was emptying as they drew abreast, and Hannibal nearly declined for lack of more players, but Frederica called behind her.
"Hurry up, Tony! You'll partner me, won't you?"
Anthony, ambling along some distance behind them with Will at his side, hurried his step and came to sweep out a chair for her, settling her with an indulgent, smitten grin. "Well," Hannibal said, sparing a glance for Will, whose somber expression did nothing to detract from his undeniable beauty, even if he seemed excessively troubled. "Will you partner me?" Will took his seat next to Freddie without responding, still far too distracted by his worries and the people around them to feel at ease.
"I do hope, Mr. Graham," Freddie said, a teasing gleam in her eyes, "that you can overcome your Omega nature well enough to count. It startled Will into a soft huff of laughter as he skated a glance at Hannibal to find him scowling, indignant and offended. Clearing his throat, Will said, "Yes, Miss Lowndes, I do. Well enough." "Well enough," Hannibal echoed and snorted. He sat down across from Freddie and began gathering the cards up in his long fingers to shuffle them. "Miss Lowndes, do not be deceived by his modesty. Will is deadly sharp with numbers, as the Hertford House accounts can attest. I dare say he will do you in before the game is done."
Will's brows rose at that in his surprise, but Hannibal seemed hardly aware of the compliment he'd paid, which made it feel keenly precious to Will, and his cheeks pinkened with a faint blush. "Despite his being an Omega?" she inquired, her tone playful, and Anthony nudged Will beneath the table, grinning.
"He is uncommon," Hannibal reminded her, and his amber gaze landed on Will with weighty assessment. "There are many surprising facets of him I have found so far, and, no doubt, several more of which I have not yet become acquainted with."
"Provided those facets don't involve you agitating him,"
Anthony said, sweeping his cards into a pile as Hannibal dealt,
"then you should be safe enough."
"Oh, I am not so sure that agitation should be avoided as such," Hannibal said, smirking, "as it can create many an interesting situation for those with the spirit to act on them."
Will bristled and gathered up his cards, darkly telling Hannibal, "As I have previously said, Lord Clarges, I refuse to become any more intimately acquainted with the carpets of Hertford House than I am just now."
Anthony laughed at that, and Freddie's mouth curved into an appreciative smile, no doubt having heard the entire story from Anthony. Will put all such thoughts and aggravations out of his head to focus on the game. As Hannibal had predicted, he was dangerously adept at counting, and played with aggressive determination that Anthony couldn't quite counter. Freddie, for her part, matched Hannibal play for play, but was trumped by Will's formidable imagination, and before long they had attracted a small group of observers. They won the first round and began to play a second, all idle conversation set aside for the sharp, rapid slap of cards on the table. Will justified his praise by taking the trick twice in quick succession, and they won by a wide lead, leaving Hannibal grinning and delighted in the reserved, embarrassed young man across from him. Will hesitantly returned the smiles and congratulations of their small crowd, slowly relaxing, Hannibal was pleased to see. Freddie, utterly charming and looking strangely pleased, excused herself in the changeover to stroll the lake on Anthony's arm, leaving Hannibal with Will and a growing, admiring crowd. Hannibal stood, absently smoothing his jacket as he did so, warmly accepting the compliments given on his game. "I have to admit the bulk of the win falls to Will," he said, moving to Will's side as he too stood to make way for new players. He still looked uneasy to be in the middle of such a large crowd, though he cut a fine figure. His new wardrobe suited him, a sleek and fitted tailoring that made the most of his athletic physique and subtle curves. Hannibal was pleased to see he'd drawn quite a few admiring gazes, and not entirely just for his prowess with numbers.
"Employee? I have no idea on earth why you would be here of all places."
The whispered speculation reached Hannibal's keen ears, carrying over the conversation rising around him. He'd been expecting such comments, but he hadn't expected how very angry they would truly make him. Will heard it as well, and tipped his chin up, searching out the scandalized couple eyeing them through the crowd. He straightened his shoulders and stretched a bit taller, unwilling to summon the least bit of regret for his actions at Hertford House. "I'm afraid that is a misunderstanding, Mrs. Wilkes," Hannibal said, his voice carrying over to them, bringing immediate alarmed stillness. He graced them with an easy smile, taking advantage of this opportunity to quash some of the gossip. He settled his hand at the base of Will's spine and stepped closer to him, aware of Will stiffening a little in response. "Lord Clarges, as you've seen for yourself, has enviable intelligence. He has indeed spent his time at Hertford House running the estate, but always in the capacity of my spouse, and in the Lector name." There was consternation at the statement from no few, though the rest continued to mill about, anxious to renew their acquaintance with both Hannibal and Will. Will cautiously tested his bond to Hannibal at that unexpected defense, surprised to find only sincerity and a low, burbling undertone of anger that was not directed at him, but rather for him. He looked up at Hannibal to weigh his expression, but his husband was already conversing with other guests, an easy smile on his face as everyone tried to engage them both at once, smiling and eager. Will tried to smile at them in return, but the darkest part of him that spoke in his father's voice fed him doubt about their sincerity. He was unused to so many people, unused to so much positive attention directed at him. He found it all rather overwhelming, but the tension subsided some with the steadying pressure of Hannibal's hand against his back. The touch was warm and firm, pressed right to the base of his spine where the slight, exaggerated Omegan curve swept down into his pelvis. Yet he couldn't shake the shadow of his father's voice that whispered of a broken saddle, a cut girth strap, and a fall that could have killed him. Will tried to tamp it down as best he could, knowing he lacked vital information regarding his accident, and that dwelling on it was only making him more nervous.
"What do you think, Lord Clarges?"
Will realized the silence had stretched on a beat longer than it should have, and glanced up to see Hannibal, 3 gentlemen, and several lovely ladies looking at him expectantly. Excuse me, I was wool-gathering," he said, blushing to seem so inattentive. "I'm afraid I didn't hear you. Please forgive me."
"My fault entirely. I should be more specific which Clarges I'm speaking to, what with there being 2 of you now,"
Will was told, and everyone chuckled politely as if it had been very clever.
"If you'd care to come for a visit at Hertford House, Mr. Katz,"
Hannibal smoothly cut in,
"we could have more time and more comfortable surroundings for estate talk. We would dearly love to have you and your lovely daughter for dinner,
as long as we aren't the main course." Will looked at the young woman before him, surprised by the tart response, and felt a smile curve his mouth at the open amusement on her face.
"Beverly,"
her father said, his repressive tone holding a note of pleading that spoke of years' worth of losing on that particular front.
"Miss Katz, lovely as you are,"
Hannibal said, an appreciative grin baring the tips of his sharp teeth,
"I value your company far too much to make a meal of you. My spouse sets an elegant table. I am sure you will not be disappointed, especially if he can procure another trout."
Will felt oddly relieved to find Hannibal gazing down at him with fond amusement. He didn't resist when Hannibal absently rubbed his back, but certainly felt warmer than he had. The earthy rich alpha scent of Hannibal's skin seemed to cling to him from that touch, a subtle marking that he was protected. It gave him a feeling of safety at complete odds with the lingering worry over his accident.
"You fish, Lord Clarges?"
Mr. Katz inquired, a sudden fevered interest lighting his face.
"No, you don't,"
Beverly warned, and reached out to take Will's arm.
"Come on, let me save you. I've something of a talent for it."
"Excuse me, gentlemen," Will said, having no choice but to go with her or else be dragged off. Hannibal merely watched, a slight smile still on his face, to see his little spouse in the hands of the capable and deliriously social Miss Katz. No doubt by the time Hannibal reclaimed him, the entirety of the country would know Will Graham better than he did.
"That child will be the death of me," Mr. Katz lamented, with a smitten smile. "But what can one do? Daughters are a gift our spouses give to us, and she is the very likeness of her dear mother."
"She is a delightful young lady," Hannibal said, recalling many times over the past 6 years when Miss Katz had crossed his path.
"And Will needs more associations with those who are closer to him in age." "She knows no strangers, Lord Clarges," Mr. Katz reminded him. "You may never get him back."
They laughed together at that, and spoke of upcoming business in Parliament, which Hannibal, as a peer, would have direct influence with. They were soon joined by others, conversation drifting along acceptable lines of polite inquiry rather than heated debate. Hannibal, however, kept an eye on Will, whom Miss Katz had installed into a gaggle of young ladies. He was too distant for Hannibal to see clearly, when he didn't seem distressed.
"With Lord Clarges, no less. It's the very same boy, I swear it. Oh, and he and Lord du Maurier were certainly having us on, claiming he was married to the Marquess of Clarges."
The comment reached him from a passing group so intent on looking behind them at Will that they didn't see Hannibal next to him.
Asked him to leave without even setting eyes on him, and it turns out he was nothing more than an estate manager for the gods' blessings. Can you imagine? How on earth he hasn't been fired by now is beyond me.
Hannibal's glower deepened as the snippets of their gossip reached him, conversations behind hands, whispered conjecture, all of which boiled down to one glaring summation. Will was too far beneath them to be Hannibal's mate. It made him that much more determined to define Will's place in this world. The fact that his place collided rather soundly with that of Hannibal's mistress was not one he could be bothered with at present, not when he was so busy trying to find a way across the distance of wrongdoings that separated him from his little mate.
"Excuse me, please," Hannibal said, stepping away from the gathering group. "Off to find better company, Lord Clarges."
It was playful ribbing Hannibal was well used to, and he promptly responded with, "And prettier as well. Or have you not met my spouse?" He strode away to a roll of delighted laughter, and moved down the lakeside towards his mate. Will, who so often seemed lost in his thoughts or far removed from himself, had been drawn into conversation by Miss Katz's friendly social circle, though she herself was nowhere to be found. Yet he seemed engaged enough, smiling and chatting. To the flighty young and curious ladies who surrounded him, Will Graham was nothing other than a very handsome, distracting young beta male, with whom they could flirt and befriend. They had no knowledge of who he was, and Will, by his ease with them, had made no move to inform them. Hannibal drew to a stop on the path and leaned against the trunk of a towering tree, just watching Will for a time, seeing the bright sparkle in his eyes and the animation in his face that lit him up like warm sunlight. It made Hannibal wonder how he would look when he was truly happy.
"Such a fuss everyone is making over that boy."
Hannibal only spared a small sliver of his attention for the woman who had drifted up next to him, a voluptuous beauty greatly testing the seams of her dress with her handsome figure.
"Is he truly your estate manager?"
she asked, tipping her head Will's direction.
"Lady Darnell insists he tried to pass himself off as married to you, Lord Clarges, when the papers first published your announcement. I am sure you had no idea he'd done such a thing. Are you not terribly shocked he has come here?"
Hannibal angled a tight, polite smile at her, amused by the naked envy in her gaze as she looked at Will.
"No, I am not terribly shocked in truth. He does precisely as he pleases, which is an admirable quality in my eyes. Imagine a man in your employ attending a function such as this!"
she sighed, fluttering her lashes up at him.
"We are inundated with such unpolished company these days. I have indeed noted a surprising lack of well-mannered gentlefolk, but I doubt very much that my cousin would invite a working-class man to her gathering,"
Hannibal said, smiling slightly when Will smiled, finding that the curve of his generous mouth suited him much better than the tight press of his lips that kept him perpetually frowning.
"I met him in Hertford Village on chance some time ago, your Mr. Graham. I find him rather plain and common," she said, fanning herself lazily. "Don't you simply despise the plain and common, Lord Clarges?" "Indeed,"
Hannibal answered, his eyes fastening on Will. He was laughing, delighted, blue eyes sparkling with good humor. He had been pressed to sit on a blanket spread out on the lawn, and his small entourage of young admirers fluttered around him like colorful, chirping birds, tittering with empty-headed amusement at his sharp and surprising humor. Hannibal pushed away from the tree and straightened his jacket, prompting the young woman to ask,
"Are you off, my lord?"
"Yes," he said, angling a look down his nose at her.
"I am afraid you have the right of it, madam. I do despise both the plain and common. As such, I am removing myself from their presence to find relief in the company of my lovely spouse. Good day."
Had he looked back, he would have seen her gaping and furiously embarrassed behind him. But Hannibal only had eyes for Will. It was uncanny, the change that fell over Will when he spied Hannibal heading his way. His dark brows drew down over his narrowed blue eyes, his full mouth pressed tight, and a mutinous expression overcame his lovely features, transforming him from a merry, careless youth into a surly, brooding one.
"Ah, Lord Clarges, have you come to scold us?"
There was a round of laughter at that, silly and meaningless.
"No, young lady, I have not,"
Hannibal assured her, not for the first time painfully aware of the 12-year age difference between himself and Will. His ferocious little Omega was young enough to enjoy a place here among a bevy of youthful beauties, while Hannibal himself was old enough to be their father, most of them. It was unsettling, to say the least.
"I have come to have a word with Will."
"Are you friends?"
one of the younger ladies asked, her green eyes empty in a way that Hannibal detested.
"I would not say that we are friends,"
Will told her, a wry smile curling one corner of his mouth, and his sly blue eyes sliding up to read Hannibal's expression,
"or that we are even friendly." "I would not say that we are not," Hannibal said, bantering with him. "Or have you not told your admirers we are married?"
Will bristled and stood, annoyed, Hannibal was pleased to see. He was also pleased to see the keen disappointment on their faces at both the news and Will's absence. Stiff with offense, Will strode away to the shade of trees nearby and gave Hannibal his back when he arrived just behind him.
"What is so terribly important and world-ending that you must pester me?" Will asked, arms crossed over his chest.
"I merely needed to escape the attentions of a rather dull and unimaginative woman,"
Hannibal said, not about to admit his satisfaction of parting Will from his admirers.
"So you sought the company of a dull and unimaginative Omega? Lord Clarges, your reason is excessively disturbed." "I have a large measure of opinions, Will, but your being dull and unimaginative does not number among them. Trust me, anyone possessed of wits enough to oust Mr. Verger and use a trout with deadly enough force certainly does not lack for imagination,"
Hannibal said, taking his elbow to walk him towards the hedge maze.
"Where is your saviour?"
"I may have offered a convenient excuse for Bev to escape her father's vigilant doting," Will admitted, his smile wry.
"Bev?"
Hannibal echoed and chuckled.
"If she insists you call her that, Will, you merely provided an opportunity, not an intention. Miss Katz is rather well known for her steadfast friendliness. She would not purposefully use you."
"No, I don't think she would." He smiled then, adding, "She is very personable. I would so enjoy if they did come to Hertford House, but I'm not used to entertaining."
"You've certainly never bored me,"
Hannibal teased him, delighted by the way Will's cheeks reddened. "The air is fresh and the clouds are out. Walk with me a while, Will." Will did so, silently for a period of time, until the hedges rose up around them. He then pulled his elbow free, unsettled by the warmth and strength in Hannibal's touch, and promptly tucked his hands into his jacket pockets.
"There are a great many people here still do not realize we are married,"
Hannibal remarked, head tipped down just slightly to see Will's thoughtful profile.
"You sequestered yourself at Hertford House all these years, just as you said. Yet you have your chance now, Will, to take some satisfaction in their discomfort. Why would you not do just that?"
"I have my own future to think of, Lord Clarges. I still have to carry on once you finish whatever mischief you're up to at Hertford House, and being exposed to the world as your spouse will only inconvenience me," Will said, aware of his attention and turning his face away. He risked Hannibal's ire, he knew, but it was far too ingrained in him that his looks were unpleasant to his Alpha. "You made it very clear to me when I came to Hertford House that you did not want me. You have spent 6 years pretending I do not exist, and society believes your spouse to be dead, either by illness or pining. I am in essence a ghost, I believe, and I would prefer to remain that way."
"I had no idea the extent of the speculation surrounding our marriage, as I pay no mind to such drivel,"
Hannibal said, taking a deep breath of cool air, checking his comfortable long-legged stride just slightly to accommodate Will's slightly shorter legs.
"Today has been revealing for me. I hear there was an incident in which you attempted to visit with neighbors."
Will laughed again, a throaty, raspy sound that played over Hannibal's senses like velvet-covered fingers. "I attended the Darnell soiree with Anthony at his insistence about a month after you left. I was summarily called an impostor, refused entrance, and asked to leave, as my supposed husband was in the capital with his mistress, and never spoke of having married a man." Hannibal frowned, mouth pursed, and clasped his hands behind his back, thoughts turning. "It was eye-opening. Before very much time had passed, it was about that I was simply Anthony's lover, and we were playing a joke, as the whole of society knew that Hannibal Lecter had married a proper woman, and I was certainly not that. I told you before, Lord Clarges, how I was perceived in the wake of your disapproval."
"So you hid yourself in Hertford House, and put about to my family that I had forbidden them to visit?"
Will released another weighty sigh and told him, "I did not want them to know me, Hannibal. As you had not mentioned me, I'd hoped to mitigate what damage I could, and keep them from attempting to mend a situation that did not bear mending."
"They would have had you out into society in a heartbeat, a slap in the faces of those who had shamed you,"
Hannibal said, shaking his head at the young man's stubborn nature. "Yes, and you would have been exposed as having married someone you considered patently unsuitable and embarrassing, which is precisely what you did not want, Lord Clarges. And as I did not want to be further ridiculed publicly by your many exploits and inattention, it seemed the best course of action I could take. Little did I realize it would follow you back to Hertford House with such immediacy."
"I will say it once more, Will. That woman is not and will not be my lover,"
Hannibal said, glowering when he thought of the widow Reynolds and her grasping hands.
"I barely knew her in my childhood, and wished I hadn't then either. Honestly, it escapes me why so many people take such an unseemly interest in my personal life."
Will, thinking he meant himself, tightly said, "I do not consider my interest unseemly, Lord Clarges, as it only extends far enough to spare me further damage. Beyond that, I hope only that your boredom will send you back to your proper family and away from Hertford House before people begin to believe there is anything of substance between us."
"And who are you trying to spare with that, Will? Me or yourself?"
"Can it not be both?" Will asked, stopping to give Hannibal a steady, unflinching stare. "You have no reason to stay here, Hannibal, and every reason to leave. If your grandfather sees reason and grants us a separation in the future, then I may yet find someone who truly enjoys my company. Our marriage would only be in the way. I stand nothing to gain by being named as your spouse."
"I do,"
Hannibal said, swinging to face him, looking down just a little to meet his moiling eyes. They were sparked with green against the frame of the hedge behind him, flecks of amber peeking up through them. Such changeable, unusual eyes, melancholy lurking beneath growing ire and bewilderment.
"Some of them believe that I have killed this imaginary woman they assume I've married. Some of them believe she is trapped up in Hertford House. Others believe she is fiction altogether, as no one has ever heard or seen of a Willia M. Graham."
"Such drivel," Will softly said, one brow quirking over his eye as he smiled, darkly amused. "What wondrous luck that you pay no mind to it."
"Ah, but I have been forced to pay mind to it today,"
Hannibal said, and took a step toward him, enjoying the slight widening of Will's eyes and the reflexive way he tilted his chin up, as much stubborn defiance as it was baring his covered throat. Hannibal caught just the faintest trace of his scent, and that strange, strengthening undertone sharpened with his sudden nerves, and leaned closer to seek more of it. "I suggest you ignore it, Lord Clarges," Will said, taking a step backwards and catching the heel of his boot on the pedestal of the statue behind him. He caught himself and stepped up on it, gaining a precious few inches to bring him level with Hannibal's own height, rebellion shining in his sharp blue gaze. "As there is no easy or satisfying solution otherwise." Hannibal turned his head in the direction of soft laughter that drifted from behind them, aware that a sizable group was blundering through the maze in their direction. He turned back to Will, who bristled slightly at the scheming he could clearly read on his face, and swiftly slid his hand around Will's waist to press his palm at the base of his slender spine. Will tipped forward in a momentary loss of balance, one hand lifting to brace on Hannibal's shoulder, alarmed by how close they were, so close that he could feel the heated puff of Hannibal's breath on his mouth, and was engulfed in his alpha scent. It was heady stuff, and Will shivered when the fine hairs on his arms and nape lifted in response, his body betraying him with sudden warmth that flooded color into his lips and cheeks and widened his pupils despite the strong sunlight. "Hannibal, what are you doing?" he hissed, alarmed by his own responses, pushing away only to have Hannibal's other arm slide up beneath his, pulling him flush to his chest. "Stop this!"
"It is too late, I think,"
Hannibal murmured, smirking and amused, his nose brushing Will's as the younger man struggled. Will's soft scent teased his nose, a warmth that slid down his throat with a burn like fine liqueur, and left him thirsty for more.
"As we now have an audience, pray don't make a fuss."
Will's breath came sharp and fast, flooding his lungs with the scent that so affected him. His eyes flicked to the group of young ladies and their beaux who stumbled into the small clearing with them, startled and curious at their position, for all the world a pair of lovers caught stealing a kiss in the privacy of the maze. "What are you on about?" he breathed, confused and furious. His traitorous heart picked up its pace, his bond to Hannibal tugging him like a line to an anchor, overwhelming him in the desire to abandon himself to Hannibal's careless, thoughtless keeping.
"Behave,"
Hannibal warned him, shifting even closer.
"I am being found besotted by my spouse. Wouldn't do to ruin the show now, would it?"
Will tightened with anger, but summoned a sweet smile for the young people staring openly at them, agog at what they were witnessing. It was an act of sheer willpower, but he forced himself to ignore the demands of his bond to this man. He was not an omega, he was neither a man nor a woman, he was simply himself, and that self refused to give Hannibal the satisfaction of thinking him cowed.
"Well, I suppose if one is to be a bear, one should be a grizzly,"
he said, because two could play this game as well as one, and if Hannibal was determined to light a fire, they may as well burn together. So he cupped Hannibal's face in his hands, and tipped his head, for all the world begging a kiss. Hannibal leaned in, pulse quickening in surprised anticipation, oddly delighted that Will was so suddenly and completely receptive. He moved close enough that Will's lips teased against his own when the young Omega whispered, "That should be close enough to fool them, don't you think?" Hannibal froze, keenly disappointed that Will had stopped just short of kissing him, the little minx, and only by virtue of his own deadly pride did he manage not to close the distance himself. It was almost more intimate than a kiss would be, eyes locked together, lashes mingling with every flutter of lids, breath pulsing against lips and hearts pounding. It would almost be a relief to just go ahead and kiss him, to force Will's angry blue eyes to close, to see him undone just a little, jostled out of his sadness and quick temper by the touch he surely craved after 6 years of solitude. "Excuse us, Lord Clarges," one of the young gentlemen said, mustering up the bravery to intrude. "We did not mean to interrupt your—" Hannibal smiled, and Will smirked, sharing a moment of amusement at someone else's expense for a change. Will's fingers fell to the curl against his shoulders, firm and strong. The subtle shift of muscle down Will's side as he moved slightly was warm and silky against Hannibal's hand. It was with great reluctance that he tugged Will down from the statue's pedestal and let him catch his feet, but he did not relinquish his hold as he looked back at their audience. "Please excuse me," he purred, unaware of pulling Will tight against him, but enjoying the light pressure of his touch on his chest and side. "I am sometimes rather overcome with affection for my spouse." "Your spouse?" There was such an air of unabashed consternation about them that Will's shoulders shook with silent laughter, though he kept his head turned away to hide it. "Yes," Hannibal said, clearing his throat to keep the amusement from his voice. "Why do you all look so surprised?" We... They exchanged glances among themselves at a complete loss. "Yes, well, excuse us," Hannibal said, deftly swinging Will around to settle his arm around his waist, feeling possessive under so many watchful eyes. "We will move along then, shall we, Will?" He cut straight through the middle of them, propelling Will along with him and not stopping until they were well clear. "And just what on earth was that, Lord Clarges?" Will asked, too flustered and amused to be angry. "I told you what that was," Hannibal said, still affected by the lingering feel of Will's warm body against his. He was beginning to reconsider his initial thought that he was not given to attraction to men, because the recollection of his eagerness for that almost kiss made him tighten with unexpected anticipation. He glanced down at Will, at the gleam of light brown highlights in his curls picked out by the sun, at the rim of his ear exposed by the wind, at the arch of his thick brows over sparkling eyes, and knew that his attraction to his Omegan spouse depended not at all on the beauty before him, but the ferocious intelligence he wielded like a weapon against the world. Tearing his gaze away from his delightfully formed, undeniably beautiful, and entirely distracting little mate, Hannibal briskly said, "We have to give the appearance of being satisfied with one another." "What an impossible task you've set yourself, Lord Clarges," Will said, sidling away slightly to gain just a bit more distance. "Pretending domesticity with an Omega." "Should I rather jump on hot coals and call it a waltz?" "If it would not trouble you to do so." "Ah, your tongue is excessively sharp, Will." "I am happily everything of which you disapprove." "I did not say I disapprove," Hannibal said, surprising him. "I merely made an observation on your nature." "Shall I make an observation regarding your own?" Will inquired, curious. Their pace had slowed somewhat, aided by the cool air blowing beneath the lane of trees, casting shade over them. "That depends," Hannibal said, amused by the way Will looked at him, forgetting his stiff reserve in favor of his burning curiosity. "On whether they are nasty observations?" "No," Hannibal said, determined not to make reference to their unfortunate clash in the library. "It depends on whether your observations involve violence." "Give me a moment," Will said, a reluctant smile curving his full mouth. "I am rather resourceful." "Trotting out your finer qualities on my behalf, Will?" Hannibal asked, his own half-smile failing when Will checked slightly, his straight shoulders squaring and familiar blank calm falling over his face. "I have no need for your approval, Lord Clarges," Will said, remembering what a precarious situation he was in where Hannibal was concerned. "Only your absence." "I am sorry to disappoint you." "You have never been sorry before."
That got Hannibal's attention.
Disappointment requires expectation, Will. Did you have expectations of me?
Will sighed, ruefully thinking of how hopeful he'd been in his father's house, with Mina whispering in his ear of how happy he could be. Happy. And he had been so foolish and hopeful and stupidly young.
Once, maybe,
he said, figuring it required an answer or else Hannibal would badger it out of him.
But only for a short time.
Until I left you?
Until I met you, Lord Clarges.
Will corrected him, tipping his face into the breeze. Hannibal fell silent at that. The lake spread out before them, but they were somewhat alone. Hannibal chanced to look over at Will and cleared his throat, venturing,
I never asked you, Will, what you expected to find at Hertford House when you first arrived.
It never occurred to me that you would be interested, Will said, gazing out at the lake, forgetting for a moment to keep his face turned away.
I had imagined you a spoiled thing, cosseted and indulged, deeply enamoured of your own looks, and well aware of your own worth, just expecting to coil me about your little finger.
He watched the wind ruffle Will's curls, exposing the curve of his ear again in a peak of pale skin. He had the oddest impulse to push Will's hair back to see that ear in full.
I never gave myself a chance to know you. I never gave you a chance to show me who you really are. I never let you know me in return.
Will turned slightly to look up at him, weighing his sincerity against a cut girth strap and the accident that could have killed him.
I know you, Hannibal,
he said, his voice soft and low as he loosened his hold on his perception.
You are the last alpha male in a direct line stretching back through history to our country's royal family. Pride and importance are bred into your soul, a fort of blood and bone housing a pedigree few can claim. You are offended to the core of yourself by that which is less than you.
Hannibal just stared down at him, absorbing his words, those vague, brilliantly blue eyes fixed rigidly on his own.
Unfortunately for the world, we are all less than you,
Will murmured, and his lids lowered as he averted his face.
Though perhaps in the end it is more unfortunate for yourself, Lord Clarges. It must be very lonely, being one of a kind. I am as alone as you are, Will,
he said, and impulsively reached out to tuck Will's hair behind his ear, satisfied to see it was just as lovely as he had imagined.
You are certainly one of a kind.
Will didn't pull away from the touch, but managed to lift his sad blue gaze to murmur,
Then we are alone together, I suppose, but alone nonetheless. We don't have to be,
Hannibal said, his gaze skipping over the beautiful scenery without really seeing it, his focus entirely on his thoughts. Will stared at him, feeling once again that he was missing something that would explain all of Hannibal's behavior, something above and beyond, or perhaps akin to, the accident that had occurred. Hannibal drew a deep breath and clasped his hands behind his back, thoughtful and silent when Will did not respond. They walked a bit further back down to the lakeside, and stopped in the shade of an awning put up for partygoers. There were several large groups about the lake, and many small boats launched. Will could hear the music now, drifting over the water in a pleasant, lively tune meant to invoke good spirits.
Will, that contract our grandfather signed hinged on one outcome, that of an heir.
Will took a deep breath, steeling himself for unpleasantness.
Grandfather is insistent on that count, Will, and your place as my spouse depends on you providing that child. Grandfather has been patient with us both, but he will not wait forever. He hasn't the time.
That child? Will asked, wondering at the change. An heir could only be a lector male, preferably an alpha. Hannibal cursed softly under his breath at his quick mind, and hastily said,
Well, an heir is a child. Either way, I believe you can grasp the basis of how such a thing must come about.
Goodness, be careful with your compliments of my deductive capabilities, Lord Clarges, lest I faint, Will said, sharp and quick. Hannibal snorted in disdain, wrinkling his nose.
Then we would both be indisposed because I would faint alongside you from pure surprise.
Will laughed, a short, raspy bark of sound that quickly tapered.
Honestly, your humor is perverse and you are spiteful,
Hannibal said, unable to repress his own chuckle.
It must be disturbing for you to find common ground with an Omega,
Will said, looking up at Hannibal, his eyes a lovely cool blue beneath his black lashes, changing to suit the sky above them. Hannibal smiled then, unable to repress it, and said,
No, it is not.
Will's gaze turned surprised, a furtive glance laced with heavy skepticism.
Hannibal, he said, using his given name to ensure his full attention. Over 6 years ago, I offered to give you an heir, and you refused me.
Hannibal flinched, the scent memory of that moment returning with sudden, profound clarity. Warm sweetness, desperation, fear, and the salt of unshed tears.
You made yourself pointedly clear, not just that even the idea of it sickens you, but that there is nothing you want less than a child with me.
Hannibal frowned, a dark flush rising in his cheeks, his own recollection of that night as crisp and clear as Will's seemed to be.
Now here we are, 6 years later. The offer no longer stands, Lord Clarges.
Hannibal tipped his head up to the slight breeze, hoping it would cool his burning shame.
I don't want a child from you. There is nothing I want less, in fact, than something that will bind me to you for the rest of our lives.
Hannibal chuckled, darkly amused, and shook his head slightly.
I suppose I deserved that.
Yes,
you did. And there is plenty more where that came from.
Well, I am glad to see that you're not suffering overmuch from the gossips, my darling. Will's eyes widened to painful proportions, and he turned to find behind him none other than his dear twin sister, Mina.